Um, just another quick introduction. Yeah, so hi, my name's Tom. I'm an Android developer here at Moneybox. I'll give a little brief overview of Moneybox as well ourselves. What we're doing at Moneybox is we're intending to build an all-in-one platform that makes it easy for everyone to save and invest for a great financial future. So we offer a wide range of products and services, and they're all delivered through our native Android and iOS mobile apps. Because we're mobile and app first, that's the primary way in which our customers interact with our products. We have to make sure that our apps are up to date, they're secure, they're free from issues, and they're really engaging as well, so that they help our customers achieve their savings targets. I've titled this talk, "Conquering Weekly Mobile App Releases," because I think there's a lot to kind of go into this, but it's really the how and the why of making the mobile app release process we have here successful, which can be extrapolated to any kind of growing business, I think. So this talk it's a technical talk. I'm not going to go into any like specific Android or mobile app architectures. There's not going to be loads of code examples, but I want to go through a lot about kind of processes and ways of working. So a lot of things which tied in, which the panel were just discussing previously, kind of like the people problems and the process problems of a scaling business. So primarily this is looking at kind of mobile teams which are looking to scale up. And so there'll be mobile app developers and kind of those people in the periphery of those teams, like QA engineers, product managers, etc. So I'll go through kind of why and how we switched from what I refer to as a batched release process into regular weekly releases for our mobile apps. Some of the benefits to the customers and to the business, go through how we've kind of achieved this, and maybe potentially we're already doing this on a number of the teams, where you work as well. And if that's the case, maybe this kind of validates some of your own decisions as well, potentially. So the first thing I kind of introduce is why I think that mobile apps releases specifically are unique, especially in terms of when we think about back-end infrastructure or like websites as a whole. Primarily, it's because the apps we're deploying are on devices which you don't own. That we're not deploying them to infrastructure in the cloud that we're renting. We can't just sort of pull these releases back as and when we want to. We're putting these on people's iPhones and Android devices that are in their pockets, and they're delivered through app stores which we've got very little control over. We have no choice other than to kind of fix forward. The user has to choose to update their app if we've made any sort of a mistake. So without kind of a back out strategy, it just means that our releases may become a little bit more scary in comparison to sort of our friends in the kind of the back end and the web roles. One of the issues which is kind of apparent in terms of moving to a more kind of weekly release cycle or a more regular release cycle is this kind of just one more feature sort of scenario. So this is where teams are essentially they're delaying or they're trying to push the release in order to align with their own kind of product schedules. I mentioned this as being kind of batched. So we sort of wait for features to be ready, and then we wait for enough of them, and then we sort of make a release. And this has the effect that teams have to kind of align with the time and a date when a release goes out. So there becomes no sort of hard and fast rule when a release is made. This doesn't scale, just simply doesn't. And one of the issues is that if we want to move away from this, we have to kind of enlighten teams towards kind of giving up control of this and then switching over to a schedule as opposed to kind of being on their own schedule, which maybe in a smaller organization, that's previously what we would have been used to. So if we think a little bit more kind of about like releasing ad hoc, like by its very nature, it's challenging because if you're doing releases infrequently, they become unfamiliar. If you're doing them infrequently, you probably find that you've got a lot to release at once. And larger releases inherently carry more risk. As well as this, it's not really a great customer experience or user experience to be able to change things like all in one go. Kind of the classic example that I draw back on here is where a large platform like Facebook used to change the UI like quite significantly in one go, and then this has the kind of the knock-on effect of alienating people. Ideally, we want to kind of drip feed these changes through. So the solution to this is what we like to call the release train. Now, it's a relatively well-known term in industry. So if we imagine that all of our code is packaged up and then it goes out on a fixed schedule every single week, in our case, into what we call our release train. So like real trains, if they're reliable, if they're frequent, it makes it really, really easy for us to plan and to be able to jump on that train. And it's not quite so impactful if you happen to miss your feature going onto that release train, because there'll be another one coming along shortly. I speak again about team alignment. So one of kind of the benefits from this is we have predictable delivery. So we know that our feature will be out very, very soon if the frequency of the releases is quite quick. We don't have to kind of make large, massive planning processes. We don't have to kind of like move the stars to align to get something through. There's no kind of forced alignment. There's less process. There's meetings about what's going to happen because the releases happened all the time, and it's more streamlined. On top of all this, if you're doing a release very, very frequently and very, very often, it becomes quite mundane. I like to use that term because it sort of really exaggerates just how kind of BAU the process becomes. And I think we can all kind of agree, like in software engineering, if a process is repeatable and it becomes boring, it's a hot target for getting automated. And that's exactly what we've done here at Moneybox. So if we can release frequently and we can release often, then we can have faster development cycles. That has tons and tons of benefits. So in particular, one is less hot fixing. If we know that the problem isn't too impactful and we can wait a week, we don't need to interrupt the flow of the release to be able to get out another version of the app midway through the process. We can learn more about our customers. So we mentioned this previously in the panel discussion. We can iterate quicker. We can measure engagement, we can test out ideas, and as a knock-on side of this, customers get new features and fixes faster. So hopefully that's sort of the benefits to releasing as frequently as possible and as often as possible are quite clear. How do we kind of do this? I guess the first kind of rule is do it as soon as you can, because the bigger the organization is, the harder it becomes to implement these kind of sweeping changes. The first kind of stage is getting the buy-in. This is what it says, like buy-in from other different product areas, platform areas, however you want to call them. And one of the phenomenal things that we discovered at Moneybox is this affects pretty much everyone in the whole organization, like right through to like customer ops and support, in terms of them having to be aware that a release is going to go out every single week now. Things are potentially going to change for the customers way more frequently. And the other kind of product like areas like product and QA, it was more obvious that they were going to have to make a lot of changes, like pretty much rip the rule book up in terms of how they were sort of planning. The key element here is just making sure that everyone here is on board, and I go back to this idea of kind of relinquishing control to the kind of the release schedule, and accepting that we're going to have these kind of faster cycles as well. So I guess how do we, from a kind of a technical perspective, how do we achieve this? We practice what we know as production ready branching. So to make this work, what we want is we want our main code branches to always be releasable, or we believe them to always be releasable. This is another term of being called trunk-based development, and this is opposed to something like Git flow, which was popular for a very, very long time. I've certainly used it in the past myself, but fundamentally this doesn't scale in the kind of way that we want it to, especially not in mobile, because as I mentioned, we have to fix forward all the time. So therefore, whatever we've released has to then go on top of what we have previously. There's no sort of reason to have a release branch that we then have to then swap back. Another reason why it doesn't work is because as we're kind of scaling, if we're keeping branches around for longer and then the kind of the main branch is changing underneath us, then the unmerged code then turns into a bit of a liability. If we're able to merge that code in quicker, then we're able to identify those integration issues quicker as well. One of the ways which we're able to do this, not specifically to mobile, but it certainly helps us, is pretty much paramount to getting started doing this successfully, is by implementing feature flags. Now, they can be just as simple as kind of the code I've popped on the screen here, in that we're just fetching a flag from a remote API, and then we're just literally just diverging in the code, potentially just going to two different screens, one which we're building, and then one which the customers are going to see. This enables us to decouple code from releases. It keeps changes hidden away from the user. And we will, as long as we're only kind of like relying on one set of repeatable feature flags, it keeps things very simple. Another added benefit as well is we can actually turn on features midway through a cycle. So we can actually increase the testing time if we haven't managed to get everything through QA by the time the release actually goes out. So this is just kind of like a diagram really of how this would kind of look like. So on the far right hand side is where we're adding a feature flag commit. and then that gives the developer building this particular feature, many different releases in order to be able to complete this feature. And it would be releasable at the end of the very far end of the left-hand side of the process, or the penultimate commit. We can turn that feature flag on, and then the very last commit is where we would then remove that feature flag from the code base. So we just keep doing this over and over again, essentially. And then we're basically doing is we were able to stretch this across several different releases without having to worry about having too much impact to the customer. It's actually only the first and the last commit which would have any kind of direct regression impact. We don't just use feature flags. It's just unnecessary and impractical for changes which we can go in straight away and which won't cause too much damage if they go wrong, and also which are obvious if they go wrong. So say, for example, we're just making a text change or something straightforward which can be checked easily, that can go straight in. Another kind of trick in our sort of arsenal of keeping this branch always releasable is to be able to test the code on branch. Now, this is kind of the last resort, but it's useful for sort of impractical situations. So in this example I've called out where we're maybe just updating an API, so it's very minimal amount of code changes to do, but it could impact an awful lot around the app. It's also going to be quite difficult to hide this behind a feature flag specifically. So we might test this on a branch first, and we then will merge this in, but we'll try and do this early in the release cycle such that the changes will pick up what we call like a natural regression. It's not a completely infallible strategy, obviously, but it's all designed to reduce risk. A couple of other processes that we put in place is this idea of priority boarding. So we try and simplify the idea that certain tickets will have more weighting compared to others. So at the start of the week, what we do is we, as a team, would within our product areas, we'll fairly assess what we think we can get done and into release. We'll call these tickets sort of priority boarding. It's kind of trained themed as well, but like priority boarding to be able to get into the next release cycle. And then we plaster this everywhere, essentially. So this would be used in like GitHub here as labels so that developers from other teams will know that these tickets have priority and we want these to be reviewed quicker. And also in Jira so that product QA know exactly what to focus on. So just make sure that everyone is aligned and it's quite clear and visible what we're aiming to get into the release. So with regards to kind of automation and then a rollout, so I mentioned that, if something is BAU and, it's in the firing line to then become automated, that's exactly what we've done quite a lot of. So we have automated integrated regression tests which run every single morning. We run our CI/CD pipeline automatically at the end of Thursday, and that automatically creates a build, so like an alpha build for QA to use. And we do a lot of other things, so kind of obvious stuff like tagging the commit with the release, bumping the app version, deploying them to the app stores, kind of things that we expect. We do a couple of other different things as well, which kind of what I'll call like kind of quality of life improvements to the process. So we use Fastlane, so we literally just have kind of pretty much one-click deploy to the next step when we're happy. We have Slack messaging to the relevant channels when a build is made. We also slap a QR code on the tickets and in the channels so that QA and product can go directly towards finding where the change is and which app version the changes have been made into. It just kind of just has the knock-on effect of just removing any ambiguity about where the code is and when builds are ready to be tested and when something's done or not as well. Just really removing any of this kind of cognitive load throughout the process. We roll out in stages. So I mentioned first of all, we have like kind of an internal beta. We use this to run out kind of manual regression testing on a Friday. So we'll have highlighted certain areas within the app which potentially would need to be thoroughly looked at by the QA team. After this, and we're happy with this, we then go to an external beta. So this is to our customers who have signed up to this, and then they're really good with like reporting back and feeding back with issues which they find. And then if we're happy with that, over the weekend on a Monday, we roll out to production as well. And this has a number of real world benefits to working. I just kind of want to just pause on this slide, maybe just a bit longer than the others, because one of the nice things was after bringing this process in, was seeing the kind of the feedback from all the different areas and different teams where it's had positive just a really kind of blanket positive approach. I think a kind of common theme here is a reduction in the amount of planning and effort required for a release. It really is quite BAU. It is quite streamlined now. And fundamentally, releases leave on time. So this has been like one major cause of issues in the past, but now they do go out, at the same time every single week. We're obviously not stopping there. We're kind of trying to iteratively improve every single time. So there's a couple of things which we're trying to get better at in the future. I didn't mention this kind of previously, but we have this concept of like a release coordinator. So these essentially, they kind of shepherd the release just to check that everything's running okay and highlight any issues to relevant teams. We've been making improvements to this process such that we're having maybe like 2 release coordinators on at once and having a bit more of a systematic idea of what their roles and responsibilities are. We want to make this kind of regression testing that we do at the end of the week a little less kind of cyclical. We want to have it so that it's kind of ongoing throughout the whole of the time rather than just being sort of shoved towards the end. And we're kind of thinking of ways in which we can kind of bring that in and make that a little bit easier for the QA team. And also we want to bring on our back-end engineers into this as well and potentially synchronize these feature flags such that we maybe just have like one feature flag per feature, which could cover multiple different platforms together as well. And that's kind of where we're kind of heading on kind of the next stage of our journey here. That's kind of everything. I appreciate it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but yeah, I think we've got a bit of time for Q&A at the end, but I'll just leave you on this last slide as well. There's a couple of links there to our mobile pages and our Android pages if anyone's curious and just want to learn a little bit more. And as well as we've got details of open positions on there. And yeah, you can feel free to kind of follow me on Twitter, chat to me on Twitter as well. That's probably the primary social way of contacting me after the end of this.